Welcome back to 15-Minute Discourse. Well, today we're going to plunge headfirst into the world of perpetual motion machines,
Okay.
a concept that's both ingenious and, let's face it, a little bit fantastical.
It certainly is. These theoretical machines, they're designed to run forever without any external energy input, have been a source of fascination and frustration for centuries, really.
Yeah, and they embody the ultimate dream of free energy, limitless power without fuel. Who wouldn't want that, right?
Right.
Okay, so we've got a mountain of your research here, historical examples, scientific explanations. We even have some modern-day attempts. To get started, what exactly defines a perpetual motion machine? I mean, what makes them so different from, like, the machines we use every day?
Well, think about your car engine. It needs a constant supply of gasoline to keep running.
Yeah.
A perpetual motion machine, on the other hand, is envisioned as a closed system that somehow generates its own energy. It violates those pesky laws of thermodynamics we all learned in school.
Right. Those laws. My high school physics teacher drilled those into our heads. But can you remind me, in simple terms, what those laws say? How do they relate to the impossibility of perpetual motion?
Absolutely. The first law of thermodynamics is all about the conservation of energy. It states that energy can't be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed from one form to another. So a perpetual motion machine of the first kind would have to magically create energy out of thin air, which we know isn't possible.
Okay, so no conjuring energy out of nothing. But what about efficiency? Couldn't you, like, design a machine that's so perfectly efficient that it loses absolutely no energy, thereby running forever?
Yeah.
That's where perpetual motion machines of the second kind come in, right?
Exactly. They try to sidestep the energy creation problem. They're aiming for perfect efficiency. But this runs into the second law of thermodynamics, which deals with entropy. Entropy, basically, it says that every time energy is transformed, some of it is inevitably lost as unusable heat,
Right.
increasing the overall disorder. A perfectly efficient perpetual motion machine would require zero energy loss, which is impossible according to the laws of physics.
Right.
It's like trying to build a fire that produces no smoke.
So it seems like no matter how clever the design, perpetual motion machines always bump up against these fundamental laws of physics. People have been trying to design these machines for centuries.
Right.
Your research mentions a whole museum of unworkable devices dedicated to these intriguing failures. Let's dive into some specific examples. I was particularly captivated by Bhaskara's wheel,
Okay.
a design from the 12th century. What's the story behind this one?
Bhaskara's wheel is a classic example of a gravity-based perpetual motion machine.
Okay.
It features a wheel with curved spokes,
Uh-huh.
each containing a reservoir of mercury. The idea was that as the wheel rotated, the mercury would flow to the outer end of the spokes on one side, making that side heavier and perpetually pulling the wheel downwards.
Wait, hold on. That actually sounds plausible. I mean, I can picture the mercury shifting, creating an imbalance.
Yeah.
Where does this brilliant idea go wrong?
It lies in the concept of torque balance. Even though the mercury shifts to one side, creating an apparent imbalance, the torque on both sides of the wheel would ultimately equalize, preventing continuous rotation. It's like trying to balance a seesaw with two kids of equal weight. No matter how much they lean, the seesaw won't perpetually tilt in one direction.
Ah, I see. So even though it seems like the mercury's weight would keep the wheel turning, the force is eventually evened out. And I imagine friction also plays a role, right? Isn't friction the perpetual motion machine's arch nemesis?
Absolutely. Friction is the unavoidable force that resists motion between surfaces in contact. In Bhaskara's wheel, friction between the moving parts, as well as air resistance, would gradually dissipate any energy the wheel might gain, eventually bringing it to a halt.
Right.
It's like trying to roll a ball uphill. You might give it an initial push,
Yeah.
but eventually friction and gravity will win out.
So even if we could eliminate friction entirely, which we can't, the concept of torque balance still undermines the design. It's fascinating how these seemingly simple designs can be so deceptively complex when you delve into the physics.
That's precisely why these unworkable devices are so valuable. They force us to confront the nuances of scientific principles and challenge our intuitive understanding of the world.
Okay.
They're like puzzles. They reveal hidden complexities as you try to solve them, deepening our understanding of physics in the process.
I like that analogy. Okay, so Bhaskara's wheel tried to outsmart physics using gravity. What about other approaches? Were there any designs that tried to harness the power of magnets for perpetual motion?
You bet. Magnets have always held a certain mystique. And it's no surprise that inventors tried to use them to defy the laws of physics. One such attempt is the classic magnetic motor.
Okay.
The idea here is to strategically place magnets around a wheel, use their repelling force to continuously push the wheel's rotor.
Okay, I'm visualizing it. You got these magnets arranged in a way that they're constantly pushing against each other,
Right.
theoretically keeping the wheel spinning. It sounds like they're trying to create a sort of magnetic chain reaction.
Uh-huh.
What's the catch here? Are magnets really not strong enough to pull this off?
The problem, again, lies in those fundamental laws of physics, particularly Newton's third law of motion.
Right.
For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. While magnetic repulsion can certainly create force, it also creates an opposing force that ultimately cancels out any potential for continuous motion.
Okay.
It's like trying to lift yourself off the ground by pulling on your own shoelaces. The force you exert upwards is met by an equal and opposite force downwards, keeping you firmly planted on the ground.
So even with powerful magnets, you can't escape the fundamental principle that every force generates an equal and opposite counterforce. It seems like perpetual motion inventors are always running into this wall of basic physics, no matter how creative their designs.
Exactly. And that's what makes this topic so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a constant reminder that we can't simply wish our way around the laws of nature,
Right.
but that doesn't mean we should stop trying to push the boundaries of what's possible.
I love that perspective. Okay, we've talked about gravity-based and magnet-based perpetual motion machines. What other ingenious but ultimately flawed designs have caught your eye in all this research? I'm ready to be amazed by more clever ideas that just couldn't quite conquer physics.
Let's dive into one that tries to exploit buoyancy. The lifting rope and liquid machine. Picture a long rope looped through a container filled with liquid. The rope passes over a pulley at the top, creating a continuous loop. The inventor's idea was that the buoyant force of the liquid acting on the submerged portion of the rope would cause the rope to continuously move upwards.
Okay, I can picture that. It's like an endless rope ladder constantly climbing out of a pool. But I'm sure there's a reason this isn't powering our homes right now. What's the flaw in this design?
Well, while it might seem like the liquid is pushing the rope upwards, the reality is a bit more subtle. Archimedes' principle, which governs buoyancy, states that the upward force on a submerged object is equal to the weight of the fluid it displaces. However, in this case, the rope isn't actually displacing any liquid, simply passing through it. The pressure exerted by the liquid on the rope is equal on all sides, meaning there's no net upward force to drive the rope's movement.
So even though the rope is surrounded by liquid, it's not actually pushing any liquid out of the way,
Right.
which means no buoyant force. It's a great example of how a misunderstanding of a basic scientific principle can undermine an otherwise clever idea.
Precisely. And it highlights the importance of understanding the nuances of these principles. Sometimes even a slight misinterpretation can derail a design, especially when you're dealing with something as fundamental as the laws of physics.
It's like those optical illusions where your brain tricks you into seeing something that isn't really there. Your eyes tell you one thing, but the underlying reality is different.
That's a great analogy. Our intuition can often lead us astray when it comes to these concepts, which is why a solid understanding of the science is so important. Speaking of which, are you ready for another perpetual motion head scratcher?
Yeah, let's do it. Hit me.
This one's a thought experiment rather than a physical machine, but it beautifully illustrates the limitations of physics, even in idealized scenarios.
Thought experiments are always fun.
Yeah.
Lay it on me. What kind of mind-bending scenario are we dealing with this time?
Imagine a perfectly elastic ball bouncing between a fixed ceiling and a perfectly rigid floor. No air resistance, no friction, just a ball endlessly bouncing in a perfectly controlled environment. At first glance, you might think this could go on forever, right?
It does seem intuitive. If nothing is stopping the ball, why wouldn't it just keep bouncing? It's like a perfectly idealized game of ping pong where the ball never slows down.
But here's where that pesky second law of thermodynamics comes into play again.
Oh no.
Even in this idealized scenario, every time the ball collides with the floor or ceiling, there's a tiny bit of energy loss.
Wait, I thought we said there was no friction or air resistance. Where's the energy going?
It's lost as heat, primarily at the molecular level during the collisions. Even though the ball is perfectly elastic and the surfaces are perfectly rigid, those impacts generate tiny amounts of heat which dissipate into the environment.
Okay.
It's like saying you can clap your hands without making a sound.
Right.
The energy has to go somewhere.
So even if we eliminate all the obvious sources of energy loss, we still can't escape the inherent inefficiency of energy transfer at the most fundamental level. It's like there's a tiny energy tax being levied with each bounce, gradually draining the ball's momentum.
Exactly. It's a reminder that the universe has a way of extracting a toll on every energy transformation. And that toll is paid in the form of entropy or increasing disorder. No matter how cleverly we design our systems, we can't escape this fundamental principle.
It's like the universe is playing a game we can't win. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep playing, right? The pursuit of these impossible ideas can still lead to valuable insights and innovations, even if we never achieve true perpetual motion.
Absolutely. The quest for perpetual motion, even if ultimately futile, has spurred countless innovations and deepened our understanding of the laws of nature. It's a testament to human ingenuity and our relentless drive to push the boundaries of what we think is possible.
I love that. It's like we're learning as much from our failures as we are from our successes, maybe even more. But let's shift gears for a moment and talk about some of the historical figures who were captivated by this idea of perpetual motion. Your research mentioned Villard de Honnecourt, a 13th century architect and engineer. What made his approach to perpetual motion unique?
Villard de Honnecourt's design is notable for its mechanical complexity. He envisioned a wheel with strategically placed hinged hammers around its circumference. As the wheel rotated, these hammers would supposedly swing outwards, creating a constantly shifting weight imbalance that would drive the wheel's motion.
Hammers on a wheel. That sounds more like a medieval construction project than a source of limitless energy. How is this contraption supposed to achieve perpetual motion?
The idea was that the swinging hammers would create a kind of perpetual overbalancing effect.
Okay.
As the wheel turned, the hammers on one side would swing outwards due to centrifugal force, creating a greater leverage on that side and pulling the wheel downwards. Once those hammers reached the top, they would supposedly swing back inwards, reducing their leverage and allowing the other side of the wheel to take over, continuing the rotation.
Okay, I'm starting to visualize it. It's like a constantly shifting seesaw. But instead of kids, we've got these swinging hammers creating the imbalance. It certainly seems ingenious for the time, but I'm guessing it didn't quite work out as planned.
You guessed right. Like many perpetual motion designs, it failed to account for the conservation of energy. While the swinging hammers could create a temporary imbalance, they couldn't actually generate any new energy. Each swing of the hammer would consume as much energy as it produced, resulting in a net zero gain. Plus, the inevitable friction in the hinges and air resistance would further dampen any momentum the wheel might gain.
There's that energy tax again.
Yeah.
Always taking its cut. It seems like perpetual motion inventors were constantly trying to outsmart this fundamental principle, but the universe always had the last laugh.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes this topic so enduringly fascinating. It's this ongoing battle between human ingenuity and the unyielding laws of nature. We keep coming up with these clever ideas, but the universe always finds a way to remind us of the rules of the game.
It's like a cosmic game of chess, and we're always a few moves behind. But even in losing, we're learning something valuable about the game itself. Speaking of learning, your research also mentioned another historical figure who tackled this perpetual motion puzzle, Simon Stevin. What was his contribution to this field of unworkable devices?
Simon Stevens' contribution wasn't a physical machine, but rather a thought experiment that elegantly demonstrated the impossibility of perpetual motion.
Okay.
He imagined a chain draped over two connected ramps with more of the chain hanging on one side than the other. The question was, would the chain slide down the ramp on the heavier side, creating perpetual motion?
Okay, I'm picturing it. It seems like it should move, right? More weight on one side should pull the chain down, and then it could just keep looping over and over. A continuous chain fountain.
That's what intuition might suggest. But Stephen brilliantly recognized that the system would actually reach an equilibrium. The heavier side of the chain might initially pull downwards, but the upward slope of the ramp on the lighter side would create an opposing force. Eventually, those forces would balance out and the chain would come to a standstill. He used something called the principle of virtual work to prove this.
Principle of virtual work. Okay, now you're just using fancy physics terms to make my head spin. Can you explain that in a way that even I can understand?
Of course. Think of it this way. Imagine giving the chain a tiny, impossible nudge.
Yeah.
If the chain were truly in a state of perpetual motion, that nudge would set it off, and it would keep moving forever. But in Stephen's setup, no matter how you nudge it, the forces will always balance out, preventing any continuous motion.
I see. So Even in this simplified thought experiment, we see that perpetual motion is thwarted by the inescapable principle of equilibrium. It's like the universe is saying, nice try, but you can't trick me with a simple chain and some ramps.
Exactly. And that brings us to a key point. The pursuit of perpetual motion is often driven by a desire to transcend limitations,
Okay.
to find a way to break the rules of the game. But what these unworkable devices ultimately teach us is that the rules are there for a reason. They reflect the fundamental laws of nature that govern our universe. And while we can certainly push against those boundaries, we can't ultimately break them.
That's a great insight. It's like we're learning to appreciate the elegance and the immutability of these laws through our failed attempts to circumvent them. But let's not forget that the quest for perpetual motion, even if ultimately impossible, has yielded some valuable discoveries and innovations along the way. Are there any examples of how this pursuit of the impossible has actually advanced our understanding of science or technology?
Absolutely. The study of magnetic fields for perpetual motion machines, for example, has contributed to advancements in magnetic levitation technology, which is now used in high-speed trains and other applications. Similarly, the pursuit of frictionless motion has led to improvements in bearing design and lubrication techniques, making our machines more efficient and reliable.
So it's like that old saying, shoot for the moon. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. Even if we can't achieve perpetual motion, the journey itself can lead to unexpected breakthroughs and innovations. But before we dive into those, I'm curious to hear about some of the more modern attempts to achieve perpetual motion. Have inventors given up on this dream, or are they still finding new and creative ways to try and crack the code?
Oh, they're still at it. And with the advent of new technologies and materials, they've got some fascinating tricks up their sleeves. One area of particular interest is the use of neodymium magnets, which are incredibly powerful compared to the magnets of the past.
Neodymium magnets. Those are the super strong ones that can make your fingers tingle when you hold them, right? I can see how those might be tempting for perpetual motion enthusiasts.
Yeah.
What kind of designs are they using with these magnets?
Well, one approach involves creating a kind of magnetic chain reaction where the repelling force of one magnet triggers the movement of another,
Mm-hmm.
and so on, theoretically creating a self-sustaining loop of magnetic repulsion that could keep a rotor spinning indefinitely.
Okay, I'm trying to visualize it. It sounds like they're trying to build a magnetic version of a Rube Goldberg machine, where one magnet's motion sets off a chain of events that keeps the whole system in motion. Are there any real-world examples of these magnetic perpetual motion machines?
You'll find plenty of designs and prototypes online, many complete with videos demonstrating their supposed perpetual motion. However, it's crucial to remember that none of these designs have been scientifically validated. Often, these demonstrations rely on clever camera angles, hidden power sources, or even outright trickery to create the illusion of perpetual motion.
Ah, the power of illusion. It seems like the dream of perpetual motion is as much about wishful thinking as it is about scientific inquiry. There's this allure of unlimited, free energy that keeps people searching for a way to break the rules, even if it means bending the truth a little bit.
You've hit on a key point.
Yeah.
The quest for perpetual motion often blurs the line between legitimate scientific exploration and outright pseudoscience.
Right.
It's a realm where genuine curiosity can sometimes be exploited by those seeking fame, fortune, or simply the satisfaction of proving the experts wrong.
It's like the Wild West of invention, where there's a mix of pioneers, snake oil salesmen, and dreamers all chasing after the same elusive goal. But even with all the hype and the occasional deception, I think there's something inherently human about this desire to find a way to break free from limitations, to tap into a source of endless energy and possibility.
I completely agree. The perpetual motion dream represents a fundamental human aspiration to transcend the boundaries of our physical world, to achieve something that seems both impossible and utterly transformative. And while that vision might be more science fiction than science fact, the very act of striving for it can lead to unexpected breakthroughs and a deeper understanding of the world around us.
You know, it reminds me of the early alchemists who were obsessed with the idea of turning lead into gold. They never achieved their ultimate goal, but their experiments and explorations laid the foundation for modern chemistry.
That's a great analogy. The alchemists, like the perpetual motion inventors, were driven by a quest for something that seemed impossible at the time. But their relentless experimentation, even if misguided in some ways, helped to advance scientific knowledge and pave the way for future discoveries.
It's a reminder that sometimes the journey is just as important as the destination. Even if we never reach the end goal, the insights and discoveries we make along the way can be incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. And in the case of perpetual motion, that journey has taken us through fascinating realms of physics, engineering, and even psychology. It's forced us to confront the fundamental laws of nature and to appreciate the ingenuity and, let's face it, sometimes the sheer stubbornness of those who dared to challenge those laws.
I love that. It's like we're celebrating the human spirit of innovation and exploration, even when it leads us down some rather unconventional paths. But speaking of unconventional paths, I'm curious to hear about some of the more recent attempts to achieve perpetual motion. Are there any modern-day inventors who are still trying to crack this age-old puzzle?
Oh, there are plenty. And while they haven't managed to overturn the laws of thermodynamics, they're certainly coming up with some creative and intriguing approaches. One area of particular interest is the use of superconductors, materials that can conduct electricity with zero resistance.
Superconductors. How are they being used in the pursuit of perpetual motion?
The idea is that if you can create a closed loop of superconducting material, you can induce a persistent electric current that will flow indefinitely without any energy loss. It's like creating a magnetic field that never decays.
Okay, that's starting to sound a bit like those magnetic perpetual motion machines we discussed earlier. But aren't there some practical limitations with superconductors? Don't they require, like, extremely low temperatures to work?
You're exactly right. Currently, most superconductors only exhibit their zero resistance properties at temperatures far below freezing, which makes them impractical for everyday use. But scientists are constantly working on developing new types of superconductors that can operate at higher temperatures, and who knows, maybe someday we'll have room temperature superconductors that could revolutionize everything from energy storage to transportation.
Now, that would be a game changer. It's a reminder that even though perpetual motion might be scientifically impossible as we currently understand it, the boundaries of what's possible are constantly being pushed by scientific advancements.
Precisely. And that's one of the most exciting aspects of science.
Yeah. It's a constantly evolving field.
Yeah.
With new discoveries and innovations always emerging. What seems impossible today might become commonplace tomorrow. And the quest for perpetual motion, even if indirectly, is helping to drive that progress.
It's a testament to the power of human curiosity
Yeah.
and the relentless drive to explore the unknown. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground in our exploration of perpetual motion machines, from the historical examples to the modern-day attempts, from the scientific principles that make it impossible to the psychological allure that keeps people chasing this dream. But there's one more aspect I want to touch on before we wrap up, the ethical implications of perpetual motion.
That's an important point. While perpetual motion itself might be a scientific impossibility, the pursuit of it raises some intriguing ethical questions, particularly around the potential consequences of achieving such a breakthrough.
Imagine a world where energy is essentially free and unlimited. It sounds utopian on the surface, but wouldn't that have profound implications for our society, our economy, even our relationship with the environment?
Absolutely. The availability of unlimited free energy would likely disrupt entire industries, potentially leading to job losses and economic upheaval. It could also exacerbate existing inequalities, as those with access to this technology could wield immense power and influence.
It's like that old saying, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it. Perpetual motion might solve one set of problems, but create a whole new set of challenges that we're not prepared for.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of considering not just the scientific feasibility of an idea, but also its broader societal and ethical implications. Technology, even seemingly beneficial technology, can have unintended consequences, and it's crucial to approach these advancements with a thoughtful and critical perspective.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always linear, and that even the most groundbreaking discoveries can come with trade-offs and challenges.
I think that's a great insight to end on. While the perpetual motion dream might continue to fascinate and inspire us, it's essential to approach it with a balanced perspective, recognizing both its potential benefits and its potential pitfalls.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time for us to take a break from our deep dive into the world of perpetual motion machines. We've covered a lot of ground, explored some mind-bending concepts, and hopefully sparked some curiosity along the way. But there's much more to uncover, from the history of scams and hoaxes to the psychological allure of this impossible dream. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back to continue our exploration of the world of perpetual motion on 15-Minute Discourse. Welcome back to 15-Minute Discourse. Before the break, we were delving into the fascinating and often frustrating world of perpetual motion machines. We talked about how these contraptions, designed to run forever without any external energy input, bump up against those unyielding laws of thermodynamics. and how, despite centuries of effort, no one has yet managed to crack the code of perpetual motion. But we also touched on how this pursuit, even if ultimately futile, has spurred innovation and deepened our understanding of the physical world.
It's a reminder that even in the realm of the impossible, there's always something valuable to be learned. And speaking of impossible dreams, let's talk about some of the more outlandish and often deceptive attempts to achieve perpetual motion, the scams and hoaxes that have plagued this field for centuries.
Oh, yeah. The perpetual motion scams. I was reading about some of these in the research you sent. It seems like there's always someone trying to capitalize on the allure of free energy for their own personal gain. What were some of the most notorious cases you came across?
Well, one of the most famous examples is Redheffer's perpetual motion machine from the early 19th century. A man named Charles Redheffer claimed to have invented a machine that could run indefinitely without any external power source. He even put it on public display, charging admission for people to come and marvel at his supposed invention.
I can imagine people flocking to see that. The promise of unlimited free energy. Pretty irresistible. So how did he pull off this hoax? Was it like a cleverly concealed power source? Like a hidden water wheel or something?
You guessed it. While Redheffer's machine appeared to be running on its own, it was actually being powered by a concealed mechanism. In this case, a human assistant turning a crank hidden in another room.
Oh, wow.
It was a clever deception, and it fooled quite a few people, at least for a while.
It's amazing how easily people can be swayed by the promise of something revolutionary, especially when it seems to defy conventional wisdom. But surely, this age of information and scientific scrutiny, people are more skeptical of such claims, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But unfortunately, perpetual motion scams are still alive and well, particularly online. The internet has become a breeding ground for all sorts of pseudoscientific claims, and perpetual motion is no exception. You'll find countless websites and videos promoting elaborate machines with claims of over-unity performance, meaning they supposedly produce more energy than they consume.
Wait, over unity? That's just a fancy way of saying perpetual motion. It's still violating those fundamental laws of thermodynamics we talked about earlier, isn't it?
Exactly. The laws of physics haven't changed just because we have faster internet speeds, but that doesn't stop people from trying to convince others, and often themselves, that they've found a way to circumvent those laws.
Right.
These modern-day perpetual motion hucksters often use technical jargon and flashy demonstrations to make their claims seem credible, but the underlying science is still fundamentally flawed.
It's like the old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Right.
But I guess the allure of free energy is so strong that it can cloud people's judgment, make them susceptible to these scams.
That's right. It's a reminder that critical thinking and healthy skepticism are more important than ever, especially in the online world where information, both accurate and misleading, spreads like wildfire. If someone claims to have invented a perpetual motion machine or any device that seems to violate the laws of physics, it's essential to approach those claims with a critical eye and look for credible evidence to support them.
It's like being a detective, carefully examining the evidence and looking for any clues that might point to a hoax. Let's shift gears for a moment and talk about something a bit more positive. We've focused a lot on why perpetual motion is impossible, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why this dream, even if scientifically unattainable, continues to captivate people's imaginations.
I think it speaks to a fundamental human desire to push beyond limitations,
Okay.
to find creative solutions to seemingly insurmountable challenges. The idea of perpetual motion, of a machine that can generate its own energy indefinitely, represents a kind of technological utopia where energy scarcity is no longer a concern.
It's like a vision of a world where we've unlocked the secrets of the universe, harnessed this ultimate power source. It's a powerful and seductive idea.
It is. And while that vision might be more science fiction than science fact, the very act of striving for it can lead to unexpected breakthroughs and a deeper understanding of the world around us.
Beautifully said. I think that's the perfect note to end on. So to all our listeners out there, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep dreaming. And who knows, maybe someday you'll stumble upon your own impossible idea that changes the world. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of perpetual motion machines, be sure to like and subscribe to 15-Minute Discourse for more insightful explorations of the ideas that shape our world. Thanks for listening.